Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm sharing a very quick and simple You're Always in My Heart card created with this Sharon's Scissors die set. This set was created in honor of Sharon Klima. She is a store owner that has been in the paper crafting business for many, many years and died suddenly in January from heart disease. So there's a portion of the proceeds from each one of the die sets of the Sharon Scissors sets sold that will go to the American Heart Association. So I have all of my pieces die cut already. The blades for the scissor die cut out of mirror finish cardstock from the Silver Treasured cardstock pack. I'm creating two scissors die cuts here, one with handles made from Wildberry cardstock and one with handles made from Dahlia cardstock. There's very few pieces in this set. There's really only 4 pieces to create the scissors, and then there are the sentiment, and the sentiment says, "You're always in my heart." So I'm going to glue them together with the Barely Art glue. I use this all the time. I have it in a fine line bottle. It works perfectly for little tiny die cuts as well as larger pieces. When you die cut the mirror cardstock, it likes to curl. So as I am assembling these pieces, I'm using my fingers to uncurl it a little bit just so that it lies a little bit flatter. After adding the glue, I will put them underneath my acrylic block just to hold everything nice and flat. Because that mirror silver cardstock has a coating on it, it does take a little bit longer to dry, so you have to be a little bit more patient. If you're just using, say, some gray cardstock, it would dry a lot quicker because paper is a lot more porous than the specialty paper with the coating. So you could also use like gray cardstock with some silver ink on it, and that would dry quicker as well. But I really love the finish on this mirror cardstock, and I think it looks a little bit more like actual scissors. So when you die cut the handles to these scissors, there's little hearts that get die cut out, and I'm going to be using them on the background of the card. Once I have those 2 pieces for each one of the scissors glued together, I'm going to join them together to create the scissors themselves. Again, using that same glue. Now, apparently Sharon absolutely loved fussy cutting, which is why these scissors are perfect for her. I think they just look adorable, especially with the hearts in the handles. They turn out so cute. There's also a teeny tiny heart that gets die cut when you die cut the handles as well. And those I die cut out of the same colored cardstocks as the handles. And they are just that little cover for the gear or for the mechanism that makes the scissors work. So I will let my die cuts dry for just a few moments just to let that glue set a tiny little bit, and then I will add glue. There's a little heart impression that gets put when you do that die cutting, so you know exactly where that piece is supposed to go. So I put a little bit of my Barely Art glue in that area, and I'm putting them in place with my jewel picker. It makes it really, really easy to place them because you can see exactly where you're going with them. Sometimes when you're using your fingers, you get either glue all over them or they're in your way so you can't really see. So using a jewel picker works really, really well. Another option here would be to use reverse tweezers because then you could see it a little bit easier as well. For the background of my card, I'm using this Cross My Heart embossing folder. I figured it was perfect for this set, especially with the hearts in the handles and the sentiment that goes along with it. So I like to center my cardstock in that embossing folder just to make that pattern a little bit centered, especially when it's something like this that's symmetrical. I am using some hammermill cardstock for that background. You don't need to use anything fancy. I'm going to be rubbing some ink and doing a little bit of ink blending on it. So I chose the hammermill because I really like using it for my ink blending. It takes ink nicely and it ink blends nice and smoothly. So once I have that centered, I put it in my machine with the stacking for 3D embossing folders. Now my cardstock before embossing was 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. I intend to make it smaller, but I always use a little bit larger piece of cardstock before embossing. Sometimes when you emboss, it distorts the size a little bit, and I'd rather trim it down afterwards to make sure that it's the size I want it to be. To bring out the background or that embossed texture, I used a little bit of saltwater taffy ink, and I just rubbed it lightly across the surface so it would just ink that raised surface. This is a step that you could omit if you don't want to have that pattern in the background. I am going to be also doing some ink blending around this piece, so it's going to frame that as well. After inking the top of that embossing, I trimmed 1/4 inch off of each side. So the finished size of this piece is 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. I'm going to have a mat around here that is 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches, and that's going to be done with that wild berry cardstock. So it's going to frame it really nicely, and it's going to tie in with the scissors as well. So when I'm doing my ink blending, I like to use these large Spellbinders brushes, especially when I'm doing it on backgrounds. They are perfect for getting nice light ink blending, but you can also add more ink and be a little bit heavier in areas that you want it to be heavier. So you can see I ink blend to pretty much nothing, but I'm heavier around the edges just to frame it a little bit more. I think it looks a little bit more interesting that way. And often the ink is going to catch on the edges of the cardstock anyways and naturally be a little bit darker there. So I do tend to play with that and make sure that it's darker around the edges. Once I have as much ink as I want on that background, I'm ready to start assembling my card. I'm using my sticky mat to hold my paper in place while I'm doing the ink blending. That way I'm not touching my cardstock, accidentally getting ink on my fingers and possibly inky fingerprints on my background. That sticky mat holds it nice and firmly and I don't need to worry about it moving around on me. I'm using that same Barely Art glue to glue my card together, and I'm just doing an A2 card here. So my mat, as I said before, is 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. This embossed piece, as I said before, is 3 3/4 by 5 inches. Now, often when you are gluing down an embossed piece, you want to make sure that you have a decent amount of glue on there so that there is some contact with the piece below. This particular one, there's a lot of flat area, so I don't have to worry about it on the back side as much, but I do need to worry about it a little bit more on the front side, because the front side, it's just that inked part that gets raised that is going to have contact with my die cuts. And you'll see that I didn't quite put enough, when I glued my scissors down, I didn't quite put enough glue on the blades. So after letting it dry for a little bit, few minutes, I do end up, kind of tucking my glue bottle underneath the blades of those scissors just to add a little bit more glue, because they just didn't want to glue down or stay down. So I'm going to start with my sentiments. I'm putting one of them at the top and one of them at the bottom. This set creates 2 sentiments. Well, technically 1 sentiment. One says "You're always," and the second one says "In my heart." They are rectangle banners and the words in them are inserted. So you could always do a solid banner and you could stamp a sentiment if you didn't necessarily want to use the sentiment that was in here. But I think the sentiment in here works really cute, or works perfectly with those scissors, and works well with this set. So after I glued those sentiments down at the top and the bottom, now I can glue my scissors down. I often like to use my acrylic block on top of my card and just kind of place my die cuts just to make sure that the placing I have in my head is what I want to do. Most of the time it works. Sometimes I will change things up just a little bit. Here I like how it turned out, so I am going to glue them exactly where they are. And you can see that the cardstock wants to curl up again. Even though I flattened it out as I was gluing it down, it just really wants to flip back up. So those are the pieces that don't really want to glue down, and I'm going to be adding more glue later. Once I glue those scissors down, I'm going to add the hearts around it, trying to make sure that that acrylic block still has contact on top of those die cuts so they are pressed down. And I started with putting 3 hearts in the background. I do end up adding a couple extra ones. I put the 3 and they ended up being towards the top of the card. So when I die cut the scissors, I get 2 of each each color of the hearts. I ended up die cutting an extra one so that I had an odd number. I always love odd numbers for things. It just looks a little bit more visually interesting. So I will glue 2 more on the bottom of the card. Now, one of the ones at the top I put kind of overlapping my sentiment. So one of the ones on the bottom, I'm going to overlap the sentiment as well on the opposite side, just so they balance each other out. After waiting for a few minutes for my glue to dry, I just realized those scissors were just not going to stick because I didn't have quite enough glue on it, like I mentioned before. So I add a little tiny bit of glue to the back of those blades, put that acrylic block back on there and let that dry. And that's the other nice thing about having a glue bottle with a tiny applicator, is it was really easy to just put it right under the blades of the scissors and just add dots of glue to make sure that it was going to sit down or stick down. Once I had finished that, I wanted to add just a little bit of extra texture to the hearts. So I added some Stardust Stickles. It's an opalescent glitter glue. It's not going to add any color or anything to those hearts. You're still going to see the actual color of the cardstock, but it is going to give a little bit of extra texture, and it just adds just a little bit more interest to the card. So again, it's a very, very simple card for such an adorable die set. And I just love the thought that it's in honor of someone that absolutely loved fussy cutting. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me. Have a fantastic day.